So on behalf of Flows to Bay and our presenter, Charlotte Canner, I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to everyone who's joining us of your Thursday. So my name is Paige and I'm from Flows to Bay and I'll be your moderator today. So if you aren't familiar, I'm just going to give you a little summary about what the Flows to Bay program is and why we encourage residents to have water-wise gardening and landscaping. So Flows to Bay is the San Mateo County-wide water pollution prevention program, and it was established to reduce and prevent pollution that's carried by stormwater into local creeks, our bay, and the Pacific Ocean. The program aims to educate the community and do what we can to prevent stormwater pollution. So this includes working with residents, businesses, and schools to get the word out about watershed protection. So I just said a word called the watershed. Not everyone knows what that is. It's a bit technical, but it's actually really relevant because everyone lives in a watershed. So that's why it's really important. And a watershed is land that water flows over or through on its way to a water body. So that could be a creek, the bay, or ocean. So it's like this funnel that carries whatever it comes into contact with. So there could be various things, and we'll get into that about pollutants, but it's carrying that water over land and into larger waterways. And again, all of us live in a watershed, so it's important that we do what we can to protect it and to have that water quality be very healthy. So that's because there's habitats for fish and birds and other living things, and also us that might be going in the waters. So we want it to be healthy for us and the ecosystems as well. So we can't really talk about this topic without also talking about storm drains. And just so you're aware, San Mateo County has a separate sewer and storm drain system. So that means whatever the water flows into the storm drain goes directly into our water bodies untreated. So there's not like a cleaning process. And your internal plumbing inside your homes, that enters a sewer system and gets piped to a wastewater treatment plant, and that water is treated. And there are municipalities that have a combined drainage system, such as our neighbors in San Francisco, but San Mateo County, it's separate. And just so you know, pesticides, even though they are, could like go through, okay, I'm gonna backtrack. Pesticides are really difficult to break down. So even though we're saying that your plumbing system, it goes through a cleaning process, it's so difficult to actually break it down. And that's why SFOs, they say don't use pesticides on your lawn, and also don't drain that pesticide down the drain because it can't get cleaned. And there's resources to be able to recycle that at a household hazardous waste facility, and we have one in San Mateo County. But I wanted to touch on that because I learned that from Charlotte, and it was a really good tip as well. So when we're talking about all this water that flows over land and into our local water bodies, that includes water from irrigation or sprinkler systems, as well as rainwater. So whatever it comes into contact with, it just carries it along the way to the storm drain and then into our creeks, the bay, and ocean. So some items to look out for are pet waste, automobile fluids, and emissions, in addition to litter, chemicals and solvents that are in our soaps. So if you're like washing your car, and what I just mentioned, pesticides, but also fertilizers. So we know that all these pollutants eventually end up in our waterways, but that's why we're here today to discuss water-wise practices that can conserve water, build a healthy garden, and prevent pollution. So I just wanted to bring this back into context. San Mateo County joins many other areas in California experiencing a severe drought, and that's indicated on a map in the next slide from the United States Drought Monitor. And next slide, thanks, Charlotte. So these numbers are reflecting our current water levels, and they're concerning to scientists and community partners. So a severe drought at this time of the year can foreshadow a more extreme drought later in the summer months, but it's important to realize that not having rain in the summer is normal for California. But what's indicating these severe drought conditions is a lack of snowpack. And 40% of California water comes to us in the form of that snowpack, that melted snow that then goes into our waterways. So this year the snow is significantly less. And even though it's like these conditions now, what Charlotte will talk about for waterwise gardening should happen all the time, drought or not. And because we are in this state that we are in now for this year, we really should be doing these waterwise practices in our garden and yard. So double motivation, we should always be doing it, and we should extra be doing it this year. So to help us kick off the conversation, I'm happy to introduce a qualified water efficient landscaper and integrated pest management advocate, Charlotte Canner. Take it away.
Thanks, Paige. Thank you for that introduction. So let's start with the basics. We're going to talk about soil. We're going to talk basics just to get everyone onto the same page, just in case we're unclear. Soil is made out of about 45% mineral particles, 25% water, 25% air, and about 5% organic matter. Now that 5% number is really just an estimate. It's like good soil. It has 5% organic matter. That number can go up to 10%. That's really good soil. It can go up to like 15, 18, almost 20%, but that's like as good as it gets. And actually after that point, it kind of doesn't add any more benefits to your soil. So that 5 to 10 range is really good for your garden. And that organic matter is usually is decomposed organic food, food scraps, leaves, fungus, bacteria, the bodies of the microbes and fungal critters in the soil. That's all the organic matter. Now, soil texture. You might have been asked, if you go to a nursery, what kind of soil do you have in your yard? That's this question. Do you have sandy soil, silt, or loam? Silt is also called loam, or clay. Sandy soil is just like, sand at the beach, big particles. They don't hold together very well. They have big pore sizes, so water rushes really quickly through it. Or you could have clay on the other side of the spectrum, very tiny particles, very tightly packed with very little space between them. Water doesn't really infiltrate well, roots don't infiltrate well, your shovel does not infiltrate well, all these things. And then you could also have silt or loam, which is somewhere in the middle. And you can also have a mixture of all three. But it's important to understand what kind of soil you do have. Now, soil structure is how all of these components are put together, how the water, the air, the minerals, the organic matter, how they're put together into an aggregate, a soil aggregate. So that picture on the bottom really shows that's good soil structure, where the particles and the organic matter are sticking together very well, but there's still space for air and water and roots to infiltrate. It has that crumbly texture, but it still holds together well. So that's good soil structure. Now, you can't change your soil texture, but you can change your soil structure by adding compost and organic matter to your soil. And I just wanted to explain why we're talking about soil in a water-wise presentation. It's really important, and it's important for the whole garden for lots of different reasons, but we do want to understand how water moves through our soil, because it's going to allow us to better water our garden. So if we have sandy soil, water, again, it has a big pore spaces for air and water to infiltrate. Water is going to rush right through it, taking the nutrients with it. So we're going to have to water more frequently. Whereas if we have clay soil, the water is going to spread out probably onto the soil surface, because it's not going to infiltrate very quickly. It'll spread, and then it's going to infiltrate very slowly and move very slowly through the soil. And again, we can change this with by adding organic material as well. But we do want to understand what we have in the garden, what we're working with, because we can work with all different types. We just need to know what we're doing. So again, what does soil have to do with water? Soil and texture and structure determine the infiltration rate. The infiltration rate is like how fast the water just comes from, hitting the soil surface and going down into the soil. Low infiltration rate will lead to pooling at the top, so puddles, where a high infiltration rate that water's just going to rush right in. Like at the beach, when the waves crash into the sand, it just goes right in. Percolation rate is similar, but it's really how the water moves through the soil deeper, not just past the soil surface, deeper down, how that water moves through. Does it move really quickly or does it move very slowly? And water holding capacity, that is how much water your soil can hold before being oversaturated. And we don't want oversaturation. Oversaturation leads to lack of air, and that can cause some anaerobic problems and just problems. But we want to be able to hold a lot of water, especially in times of drought. And we can improve all of these things by adding organic matter. And the best way to add organic matter to your soil is by adding compost. I teach webinars on compost, so I can talk about compost all day long. I'm happy to answer your questions about it, but the main thing to understand is that compost is going to help your soil in a lot of different ways. So it's going to improve your soil health overall. It's going to improve that soil structure. Compost will take those big sandy particles and glue them together so that water doesn't rush right through quite quickly. It will help hold it there. If you have clay soil, adding compost to that soil is going to break up the particles, spread them apart a little bit, adding air and water, adding pores for air and water to infiltrate more. Compost really adds like a spongy quality to your soil, which is really what we want. And because of that spongy quality, it increases water retention in soil. Compost can hold 5 times its weight in water. So again, super important when we're entering these hotter months. It's going to make your soil just more efficient. It does increase the microbiology in the soil. We need that microbiology to keep feeding our plants. Even in times of drought, those plants need nutrients to keep going. And it does filter pollutants from stormwater runoff. Compost can filter about 60 to 95% of urban pollutants when added to the soil. And then another organic material, or in theory, an organic material that we can add to our soil to help that soil water holding capacity, that water retention, is mulch. And now mulch doesn't have to be made out of organic material. Mulch is any material that's covering the soil surface. So it can be made out of bark and wood chips, which is what I would recommend. You can use compost as a mulch, lawn clippings, landscape fabrics, or like a hemp, netting. Rubber chips can be used as mulch. Oyster shells, gravel, those are the inorganic version or kinds of mulch, but then there's also leaves, newspaper, and straw. All of this can be used. It kind of depends on the look you're going for, the access to materials you have, and kind of what you're using the mulch to do. That's what would determine what kind of mulch you would get. I do recommend any kind of organic mulch, so that's really anything on this list except for oyster shells, gravel, and rubber. And landscape fabric, I think, is usually can be made out of a plastic material. You're going to get the most benefits from an organic mulch. And those benefits are many. So we have tons of benefits from using mulch. Mulch really is just a protective layer on the soil. It protects, it really just covering that soil will help with your water infiltration, actually. So when you're watering, sometimes soil can get a little hydrophobic, so meaning that water doesn't sink in really quickly, it'll kind of run off. But mulch actually really keeps it there. It'll keep that water in place and help it infiltrate the soil better. It conserves water by reducing evaporation. That layer of mulch might get dried out, but if you dig down under a little bit, you're going to see that that soil underneath there is still moist, depending on when you last watered it, of course. It acts like a little insulation layer, so it keeps soil cool in the summer and warmer in the winter, which is really important because your plant roots don't want big swings of temperature. They want to be pretty regulated in temperature. So if you can keep that coolness in and that warmth in the winter, your roots are going to be much happier. Your plants are going to be much happier. and less stressed out. That organic mulch, as it breaks down, it will feed the soil organisms. It also creates habitat for beneficial insects. Any kind of mulch or anything covering the soil will prevent weeds from sprouting and growing. And again, that layer of protection will reduce soil compaction and erosion. So soil compaction, meaning, when you're stepping on some soil, it will smush the soil down and will reduce the amount of pore spaces for that water and air to infiltrate, which can lead to increased other problems. And it really keeps it keeps the soil in place by preventing erosion. Anyways, all right. So those are our basics: our soil, our compost, our mulch we're going to use in the garden. And now when we're looking at our garden and our yard and we want to create a water efficient garden, here are some things to consider. And we'll go into each of these a little bit deeper. So we're going to choose the right plants for our garden that are going to fit our microclimate. Perennials do tend to be less water hungry, I guess the word is thirsty, I guess would be the word. And we can create shade with trees and large shrubs. We're going to focus on hydrozoning, which I'll explain in a moment, but that's really just grouping your plants together that need the same needs from water, sun, etc. Hardscaping, we're going to think about what we're doing hardscaping wise in the garden, maybe increase our permeable surfaces so that any water that does fall on our yard can infiltrate, and we can consider rain gardens. So choosing plants for our gardens, we really want to focus on, if you want a water efficient garden, you're going to focus on choosing California natives or Mediterranean plants that are adapted to this climate. So we have our wetter, milder winters and our dry summers, no rain in the summer. So these plants are adapted to that environment, and they can withstand long periods without water. And we're going to also further, just understanding we do live in the San Francisco Bay, further we want to look more microclimate at our own yard. So each yard has many microclimates within it. So we really want to observe our yard before we go to the nursery and spend lots of money. We want to observe, where are the shady areas? Where are the sunny areas? Are there low points? Are there points that get a lot more water? Is there a really windy area, or is there something that's covered? We really want to understand what's happening in our yard over time, because all of those factors will, if the plant is not suited for those factors, it's just going to be an unhappy plant, and we're going to be stressed out and the plant will be stressed out, will lead to pests and problems like that. So, and the right plant in the right place, of course, will be more water efficient. If a sun-loving plant is put in a sunny area, you properly water it, it will thrive. And as opposed to if you put a fern in a sunny, bright area, it's going to be dried up in a minute and need all that water. That's one basic example. So just to touch on how much sunlight you might need, just to understand the phrases that you might see on these little tags. Oops, can you see them? Plant tags that you will find in each plant at the nursery. These have a lot of information on them about your watering, your sun, the space requirements of your plant. So it's really important to look at these. Also ask your garden, your nursery staff about each plant. They'll know a lot. So full sun, that means 6 or more hours of direct sunlight. That's usually for our veggies. We probably want to focus on that because a lot of veggies are going to need that full sun. Part sun, part shade is 3 to 6 hours of direct sun. And now morning sun is preferred just because morning sun tends to be cooler. It gets quite hot in the afternoon. So you want to make sure that if your plants do get afternoon sun, they can tolerate that kind of heat. And then there's dappled sun, which would be filtered sunlight all day, which is like any plant that might be in the shade of a tree, but still has some light coming through that tree, or maybe a shade structure. And then shade would be no direct sunlight at all. So maybe under a very well shaded or a thick leafed tree. And then keep in mind there's also bright shade and dark shade or deep shade. So you do want to make sure you're aware of that as well. And then hydrozoning, I just mentioned this term earlier. This is grouping plants with similar irrigation and other microclimate needs. This, if you do focus on grouping your plants properly, it's really going to make your life a lot easier. Because if you do set up an irrigation system, you can put all of the plants in one area on the same zone, so they're going to get the same amount of water as each other. So that's going to keep them happy, hopefully, if they all have the same water needs. Also look at microclimate needs: sun, shade, wind, heat. Keep in mind, like, even little corners of your yard can get really hot just because they're up against a fence. So just really explore your yard, spend lots of time out there, watch, go, like feel the heat, feel the shade. Really be observant before you start planting. And to help you out, there's a ton of resources. I can have a page send out some of these resources for you after as well. There are several websites, excuse me, out there that will talk about plants that are great for our climate. So there's the Arboretum All-Stars, which is through UC Davis. So that's actually a searchable database that you can find the right plant that will be right for your zone. There's the BASCWA website, areagardening.org, that has plant lists. So you can do like lawn replacement or pollinator garden, find different lists, or like winter flowering, lots of different kind of plants. There's the California Native Plant Society that's going to help you find the right native plant. Again, those native plants are going to be better, more tolerant and more water wise of our drought conditions, excuse me. The local master gardeners, there's the San Mateo, San Francisco Master Gardeners. They are a wealth of knowledge. They have a very robust website, and you can always send them an email about specific plant needs or plant questions. And then there's this great book called Plants and Landscapes for Summer Dry Climates. This is through the East Bay Municipal something district. Sorry, I apologize. I don't know. It's East Bay Mud is how I know it. But you could buy it through there. There's also this great book, not specific to the Bay Area, but it's great for California. I don't know if you can see it, Western Garden. Classic California gardening book. They come out with new editions every couple of years, but always great information there. All right. So continuing in our garden, creating a water efficient garden, we want to look at any hardscaping. So instead of laying down a slab of concrete, maybe we want to consider some permeable surfaces, and that can look a lot of different ways. It can be a pathway of mulch. It could be a brick stone way like this picture. It could be gravel. Permeable surfaces are great year-round, because in the winter, when we are hopefully getting those winter rains, all the water that hits the surface, instead of just rushing off either into the garden and overloading a plant, or into the street and going down the drain, water is actually going to sink through that permeable surface and go down into that soil. And the more water we have going down into the soil, even if there's not plants right there, is going to be helpful. The more water that goes down is going to be the more water available during the summer, during the drought period. So we really want to feed that soil lots of moisture anywhere we can get it. More moisture will also continue to feed the microorganisms in the soil, and those microorganisms are going to continue to work hard to keep your plants healthy as well. Another option, just another beautiful photo of a permeable surface, is a decomposed granite walkway. So again, it can be made, your permeable surface can be made out of lots of different materials depending on your aesthetics needs. And actually, I did want to just point out with this photo, so we want to think about when the rain or our sprinkler system is hitting that decomposed granite walkway, it's not necessarily a waste of water there, because actually when it goes down into this waterway, those roots on the plants surrounding this walkway they don't just stop at the walkway, they go under the walkway. So any water that we can have going down through that material will also be feeding those plant roots that are right next to the edge. I hope that makes sense. And then you could also consider adding a rain garden into your yard. This is just a really, I don't know, I think they're really interesting and they can be very beautiful. Rain gardens, I will say Flows to Bay has webinars just about rain gardens. So I recommend checking out their recordings and their calendar to see if there's either one coming up or a recorded webinar. But rain gardens are really sections of our yard that might be, close to our gutters or anywhere water tends to pool or gather. We create these spaces. They can be really just little pools. They can be beautiful, like little streams. They're meant to slow, spread, sink our water. So instead of coming off of our roof into a gutter and rushing right out to the street, we're collecting it in a little garden. The garden might fill up a little bit, turn into a little pond for a few minutes, a couple hours, maybe even a day, depending on how much water. And then it'll drain, it'll slowly make its way through the garden. Maybe some will end up on the street, but by then it'll be very little. The rest has infiltrated down into the soil and feeding those plants. And a lot of the plants that are used in the rain gardens tend to be California natives that like that kind of environment. And then rainwater harvesting is another great way, not really applicable right now, but maybe something to prepare for the fall. It's a great way to keep all that water, that resource that we have, on site. So when we do have rain, hopefully in the winter, 1 inch of rain falling on 1,000 square foot surface, so think of your roof, will mean 625 gallons of water, just that 1 inch of rain. So that's actually going to fill up your rain barrel real quick. So it might actually be good, depending on the surface of your roof and depending on the surface of your roof, you will want to maybe have more rain barrels as well. And we'll talk about rebates later, but I believe there is a rain barrel rebate through Flows to Bay, and Flows to Bay has more information on that. Then they can be very simple to set up. There's also a wonderful store. Unfortunately, it's not in San Mateo. It is in San Francisco, the Urban Farmer Store, that does have a lot of rain barrel infrastructure, I guess we could call it, and tools for setting that up. But Flows to Bay will have more information on that as well. And again, instead of having the water run off our roofs, into our gutters, out to the street, into the stormwater, why don't we just keep it on site? We'll have it throughout the summer and be able to use it for our gardens using that water that's already fallen, instead of spending money to set up our sprinklers and pump water out onto our yards. So how to water. Now we're going to talk about how to water. When we are watering, we really want to focus on watering deeply and infrequently. And this is because roots basically follow water. So when we water deeply and we allow the water to infiltrate nice and deep down, we give it enough water so that it really goes deep down, those roots are going to follow. If we are just watering a little bit on the surface every day, those roots are going to stay right up at the surface, and they're going to be susceptible to temperature swings. And that area, the surface, is where all of the the water evaporates the quickest. So it's going to be very susceptible to that big swings in temperature and moisture levels. Whereas if the roots are nice and deep, that moisture level down deeper in the soil is going to be more consistent. So your plants will have consistent water access. And I say infrequently because we do actually want, depending, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but we do really want the top couple of inches of the soil to dry out between watering. We don't want to be consistently soaking our plants. We do want to make sure that they do get a little bit of dryness on top, depending on the, of course, that amount of dryness depends on the plant's needs and the plant size, of course. So I can't give you an exact number, but we do want to get a little bit of dryness on top. And again, we want to understand our soil type because this will help us understand how to water. Clay soil will spread out and water and infiltrate very slowly. So with clay soil, you might want to pulse the water. That's a term we could use. So maybe water a little bit, walk away if you're hand watering, for example, then come water the rest of your garden, come back, water again, I guess your whole garden is clay, but basically water a little bit in stages over a period of time. So over 20 minutes in the morning, you're going to water an area a few times so that the water between will have a chance to infiltrate into the soil. Once there's no pooling again, add more water. Whereas sandy soil, that water's going to rush right through. And you want to make sure for that reason, you might want to water more frequently. You might need to water more frequently because the water is just going to go right down, deep down, and it's going to take a lot of nutrients with it as well. All right, and we want to make sure we're irrigating properly again. So we're focusing on deep watering, but we also want to be aware of where the water is entering the soil. So this is, apologies for the crude drawing, but it's effective. So for example, the one on the left, if you're watering a sprinkler, but you're not watering, you're watering with a sprinkler, but you're only watering for a certain amount of time, not enough, not a ton of time, that water is really only going to stay on the surface and it's not going to get nice and deep. So those root systems are going to stay on the surface as well. The tree might survive, but it might not be quite as robust as we want it to be. The middle photo drawing is supposed to be like a drip emitter, drip line with the little triangle you could see on the side of the plant. That's the emitter where the water comes out. So what happens here is that maybe that was the right place for the emitter when the tree was first planted, but as the tree grew, we didn't change that setup. We didn't expand it out. So what happened is the water is only coming on one side of the tree. The root systems are on the side, and it's not going to be quite as, again, not as a robust tree as we want it to be. Whereas the tree on the far right had deep, even watering around the whole tree. We expanded the watering area as the plant grew, and that has a nice robust root system and tree canopy as well. And so just to clarify, when I talk about watering, we really want to focus about water at the drip line. The drip line is that outer edge of trees and shrubs. This can also be, you can think about this with a tomato plant as well. Anything that has a bit of leaf canopy or even a little perennial, we want to really just get to that drip line. We don't want to be focusing water at the crown. The crown is the base of the plant where the underground parts and the above ground parts meet. We don't want to focus water there because one, it will invite rot and crown rot and other fungal problems, and it's not going to help the root system expand. Here's another slide to help demonstrate that. This is like looking down at a tree or any kind of shrub, really. We have the tree in the middle, but then we have the root system that expands way out. So we really want to be irrigating that whole area to get the, again, encourage the roots to go out and down. And so a few terms for you, again, when you're looking at these little tags at the nursery or you're reading about them on the All-Star Arboretum website. So no water once established. Sometimes it's the NWOE. That's really, we're only watering plants while they're being established. So that means we're right when we plant them, and the first year or so as they're getting, they're developing their root system. That's when they're getting established. Plants always need more water when they're young like that. And just to clarify that perennials need about a year to be established. Small to medium shrubs will take about or up to 2 years to get established, and trees can take 4 to 5 years to be established. Again, it depends on which tree you are or what plants you're planting. So we'll water more frequently during that establishing phase, and then once they're established, done. No more water. They can tolerate long periods without water, maybe just get the rain during the winter. Low water will be, we water thoroughly. We water that plant thoroughly, but then we let it really dry out, almost to the point of like no water left. We really want like a good, again, depending on the size of the plant, we want a good, half of the root zone to be dry before we water again. And then regular to moderate water would be just that. So making sure that we do wait for the, top inch or so, inch or two to get dried out, but then we're going to water it again. So we do want to make sure that that plant has plenty of access to water, and then ample or high water, which would be something like a fern. We would really want to keep that soil wet, not soaking though. We still do want to let that soil dry out a little bit at the top. We don't want a bog. We don't want it to get smelly and stinky, but we don't want it like soaking in water, but those plants do like what they call wet feet. And so you might ask, well, so we know how much to water, how often do we water, and how to set up a timer. Now, we'll talk about timers shortly. I do want to just say I can't give you an exact number of how much to water your plants. It really takes a lot of observation at first. But there are some great guides online. This I grabbed from the Urban Farmer Store. They have some great guides. This is just for July watering in the San Francisco Bay Area, depending on what kind of soil you have and what kind of irrigation you have and what kind of plants there. It's super helpful. There's also more information. I mean, there's full year-long calendars as well online. I think Paige is going to share some of those links with you. What I would do is look at those schedules, start with what the schedule suggests for what you're planting, and then really observe, because again, the texture of your soil might not be exact sandy soil. It might be a mix. You might have a layer of mulch on it, so that's going to affect how much water is staying in the soil. Your plant type might need a little bit different than this, just general perennials and ground covers. And your microclimates of your garden could affect it. So do you have a really windy garden? That's going to lead to more watering. Is your area a little bit cooler? Do you have fog? All those things are going to affect. So you really want to observe the watering. We'll get into the actual systems in a moment, but you really want to observe the watering, feel out the soil after you've watered, stick your fingers down, dig down with a trowel, and then before you water again, or before like you water again according to the schedule, dig down again, feel that soil. Is it dried out? Does it need to be watered? Or maybe you can skip to the next day and then give it another day to dry out. So talking about systems, and there's some really wonderful systems that you can set up. And there are some rebates for some of the systems, and there also can be very simple and not very expensive as well. So drip irrigation is super efficient. It's just lines of plastic tubing, PE tubing on top of your soil surface with little emitters that drip at a certain rate right directly onto the soil. So there's direct contact with the soil, way less water evaporation. And you can set the timer. They come with timers that you can set to go off early in the morning when the air and the soil are cooler. That's when you want to be watering, much earlier in the morning. So it could be like 4 or 5 or 5, 6 o'clock before it gets too warm out there, depending on where you live. And then you can set the clock for multiple start times, which is good if you have, for example, that clay soil and you need to pulse that water. So it could go off for 10 minutes, wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, wait 5 minutes, you know, whatever your plant needs. And I do want to remind you, though, that while these systems can be really wonderful for giving your plants consistent watering, especially, you know, if you go on vacation or you leave for a few days, you don't have to get out there every day to be watering. You do want to make sure you do check on it frequently because it's not a set it and forget it system. You can have leaks, you could have clogs, you just really want to observe where that water is going and make sure that your plants are getting what they need. So here are some more parts of the drip irrigation. There's the irrigation emitters, and then there's PE tubing with an inline emitter. So it drips, you can see it drips from the end on the left, just the end of the tube, or inline in the tube. That tube could be like wrapped around this squash plant or inline. And then different PE tubing and different emitters are different sizes. So some tubing is 1/4 inch, or some is a 1/2 inch. Those are the two most common sizes for emitters, and they have different flow rates. So you do need to know that. You can actually also get tubing that has, you know, the emitters are at 6 inches or 12 inches or 18 inches away from each other. All of that information, the size of the tubing and the distance they are apart, is really important to know because that's going to affect your flow rate, how much water is actually coming out of the tubing in a certain period of time. That's going to dramatically change how much water your plant is getting. Another more simpler version of a controller would be a hose bib, a controller that just goes right on the hose bib that will turn the water on and off. Sometimes it's great to, if you have a pretty simple, this is good for like really simple gardens where you really only have like one hydrozone or maybe two. So it's just going to be a single zone that turns on for, but you could have a split I forgot the word, but a split faucet, I guess is the word, that comes out of the wall where you could attach the hose bib the hose bib battery controller, to one side, and then your hose to the other, so you have your automatic watering for one zone on the controller, and then you can also just hand water with the hose with the other side. I apologize, I forgot the words for that. And then some other ways to water, slightly less efficient, but also very good to use and easy to use are soaker hoses. So soaker hoses are like just hoses with lots of pores in them. So they're not as direct and localized and specific as the drip irrigation, the drip line, but they are going to still give you water basically directly on the soil surface. These are really good for newly planted veggie gardens because actually the water spreads out a little bit more, so it can reach a lot of more veggies at once and really soaks them, which veggies need a lot of water, unfortunately. And then there's sprinklers, so good for lawn or a large area that needs the same amount of water. They're less efficient. There's a lot of evaporation. If there's wind, the wind's going to blow the water where we don't want it to go. So not ideal, but certainly can be used in an efficient way, especially if you turn it on early in the morning, go out with your coffee early, leave, put it on, and then go back and turn it off in a few minutes. That will be the best way. You just never want to turn it on when there's more than like 5-mile-an-hour wind, which is hard to come by in this area, but if you can find it, that's when you would want to water. And then I didn't mention them, but hand watering, also a great way. If you have a small garden, if you have the time, it's a great way to get out into your garden, really get to know all of your plants, how that water is infiltrating. You can also be, inspecting your plants for pests when you're out there hand watering. So I totally support hand watering if that's something you have time for and want to do it. And now you can understand if you're watering the drip line directly onto the soil. There's ways to do it very efficiently. All right, so some irrigation maintenance. We're just going to talk about a couple of troubleshooting and some do's and don'ts of irrigation, and then I think we'll be wrapping up soon. So irrigation maintenance is important. Again, it's not a set it and forget it system. You do want to make sure that you're observing your system, whatever it is, making sure there's no leaks. The water is going where you want it to go. There's no overspray. It's not hitting, the street. Half of your water is going down the storm drain. We really want to make sure that your system is as efficient as possible. That will save you money and headaches down the line. And there's lots of tools that you can use to fix those leaks. There's these things called goof plugs on the left that just will plug up little holes in your drip irrigation. And then on the right, those are just different connectors that you can use for drip irrigation lines so you can add additional offshoots. Now here's just a couple of photos I'm going to share of what not to do. So this tree, you can see there is a drip line that goes on the far side of the trunk. And also you're going to see that sadly there is mulch piled right up over the crown of this plant, which is very upsetting to me. Let's look a little closer. So we have the PE tubing that goes right by the trunk, only 6 inches away from the trunk. Right there is an emitter right there. And that is not what we want to do, because that emitter is basically watering right next to the crown. It can invite root rot. It's not helping those roots expand out. What we want to do, what probably happened was this tree was significantly smaller when the drip irrigation was installed. So it was supporting that root zone, but it was never moved with the growth of the tree. So that's probably what happened here. So we really want to make sure that we're, again, observing where the water is going, expand. Hopefully our plants are growing. We do want to expand the water for them as well. And clear that mulch around that crown base. It's really bothering me how high up it is. We don't want that mulch right up there. Here's another one. Someone who watched, someone who had their irrigation professionally installed. They had these plants professionally planted, and the irrigation was installed by a professional. So they went out to look at the irrigation to see how they did, and they noticed that the emitters are right up against the crown. And you can actually see the drip line, or not the drip line, excuse me, sorry, the water line on that trunk. You can see how it's dark and then light. So that mulch was actually way up, 3 inches up around the crown. And then this emitter was placed right next to the trunk of this plant. So, and that was a professional. So again, now we know what we're looking for. You might hire, you can hire a professional to do the dirty work and the heavy lifting, absolutely. But you definitely want to make sure you're checking them, or checking the work after, making sure they're putting those emitters around the drip line. And then if you want to take over, after a couple of years as your plants grow, you're going to want to expand it out so that the root zone can really get the moisture where it needs it. All right, to wrap up, So that was, I will say that was a very, brief intro. There's so much else to talk about, especially as we're entering a drought, but I hope that helps everyone get started with a water efficient garden, or, starts thinking about their water efficient design. So we're going to add organic material to soil to increase our water holding capacity and just make our soil texture better for holding moisture. We're going to take advantage of mulch to reduce evaporation and protect our soil. We're going to water deeply and infrequently, and we're going to expand that water out to the drip line, really to get that whole root zone watered well. And Paige is going to take over in a second to tell you about some rebates that San Mateo offers for high efficiency irrigation systems and removing lawns.
Thank you, Charlotte. So some online resources to learn more about the topics we discussed today. On the Flows to Bay website, there is a page called WaterWise Home Projects, and they link out to some more resources there. So when you're on the website, you hover your mouse over preventing stormwater pollution, and then it pops down, and that's the page. And it's also the URLs there. And that also will be emailed along with the other resources we discussed today after the webinar. Next slide, Charlotte. And another great online resource that is local is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, or BASCWA, BAWSCA. They have a lot of different tips and rebate information as well. So that's a great local source. Next slide, Charlotte. And talking about rebates, so there's a lawn conversion rebate called Lawn Be Gone, and it's combining also a rain garden option onto that. So there's a good combined rebate with those two. It's on the BASCWA website, and rain garden information is on that page right there for the rain garden rebate. And we also have a rain barrel rebate. And for this year, there is a tiered rebate. So the larger your rainwater harvesting system, the larger the rebate. So we have that combined program with BASCWA, and then there's also a Flows to Bay, a rebate on top of that. So, and there's also your jurisdictions. We have a list on that page, flowstobay.org/rainbarrel, and you may live in a city that has an additional discount as well. So all of these rebates are to help you have these water-wise practices in your yard and to make that as easy as possible.